and welcome to Oh Canada, an irreverent look at Canadian news made for Canadians by Canadians. This week we're going to be looking at the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, or CERB, which was the $2,000 a month support payment given by the government to Canadians who lost their jobs due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Before we begin though, let's just address the name CERB, because even that is something that Canadians fail to agree on. Should it be pronounced CERB or CERB or just CERB? I pronounce it CERB because that's the correct way to pronounce it. However, while we were investigating this story, we found a lot of you like to pronounce it CERB. Just remember, CERB is what keeps you from getting kicked to the curb for not paying your rent. So before we get bogged down in the whole is this dress black and blue or is it white and gold debate, I'm just letting you know now that we're going to call it the CERB on tonight's show, and for those of you out there that don't like that, well, you can just sis my ass. It's also not to be confused with the other CERBs out there, such as the Canadian ESCORT Recommendation Board, which one might have hoped was just a bunch of old car fanatics discussing where you can find the livingly restored Ford Escorts available to buy or hire, but it was actually a quite illuminating forum thread regarding a very different type of Canadian Escort to rent, which also may or may not have been where I found a picture of a much different Ford Escort altogether. I know, I can't unsee it either. Also, not to single anyone out in particular, but looking at this other CERB, I noticed that one city stands out in terms of just the sheer number of reviews and recommendations found for escorts in their area. Hey there, Ottawa, you sexy minx. Yeah, we see you. We thought you were boring. In fact, we realised that sometimes you're unfairly mocked by comedians on the internet for being boring. Ottawa, which was already the most boring city in Canada before COVID-19 struck. Getting the day off of work in Ottawa is kind of like when you were young and you got the day off of school because you had a big day at the dentist planned. But it turns out we were wrong. With over 60,000 posts coming from Ottawa alone, it seems they only roll up the sidewalks at 11 because everyone's retired indoors with their ladies of the night. Good for you, Ottawa. At least we know what you're doing with your CERB dollars. Get in. So anyway, back to the other CERB. Now, while this benefit was undoubtedly a lifeline for many Canadians during the pandemic, one that helped people pay their rent, put food on the table and keep almost 7 million of you from devastating financial hardships, we're going to review the handling of the rollout of the CERB and look into whether the government got it right. We'll also look at what happens now that it has come to an end and look towards the future as to what might replace it. Now, usually the government and incompetence go together like too many beers and poutine. Try as we might, we just can't seem to have one without the other, and both make us end up feeling sick to our stomachs. That said, overall, the Canadian federal government seemed to have done a pretty good job rolling out the CERB when Canadians needed it most. Even Conservative MP Andrew Scheer couldn't figure out something legitimately to criticise, so instead he trotted out the same old, more transparency demand. And for all we know, he could have been referring to a fogged up bathroom window. No, get that graphic off. It makes little Andy look like a greasy perv. Bad writers, no! Anyway, within weeks of a major economic shutdown, the CERB was announced as a no questions asked relief fund, provided you were forced out of work due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So like a one question asked relief fund. It was as if for a brief moment the Liberals did their best Oprah impression. You get a benefit check, and you get a benefit check, and you get a benefit check. Which, to be fair, was way more popular than Trudeau's last impression of a person of colour. The programme was initially approved for 16 weeks in April and later extended to 24 weeks in June and then finally 28 weeks in August. Basically, as the weather got warmer, things got longer, which is the reverse of the little known fourth law of thermodynamics. As things get colder, other things get shorter. According to the federal government, about 47% of Canadians collected CERB. That means almost half of Canadians depended on CERB at some point for basic essentials like food and shelter, while we, and I can't believe I finally get to say this, did the responsible thing, which is to stay at home to play Animal Crossing while we let the experts figure out how to get the pandemic under control. Now, the rollout wasn't perfect. Basically, everyone who said they qualified for the programme was approved, which is a problem given the rules for CERB were unclear, ever-evolving, and sometimes just plain confusing during the launch of the programme. The entry conditions for the CERB were kind of the same as at that pub close to your house when you were growing up. There was technically a bouncer at the door, but he didn't really check IDs and he would just let anyone in. Except on some nights when he would check some people's IDs to make it look like he cared. And then on other nights the bar was just closed altogether and people couldn't get access to the CERB. And then eventually one night the police were called and everyone had to try and drink as many shots and cocktails as they could before getting thrown out for breaking all of the CERB rules. But if you think of how massive the program had to be and how quickly it needed to be rolled out, a little bit of confusion isn't that unreasonable. Now, don't get me wrong, that confusion probably led to many opportunists trying to take advantage of the situation, such as a woman from Vancouver who, back in May, tried to defraud 77 residents of a seniors' home into signing up to receive the CERB, despite number 1, the seniors not being eligible for it at all, number 2, each of them only receiving a cut of each cheque, and number 3, being stuck with the entire bill plus fees for when, without fail, they had to pay it back. I mean, if we're going to con old people who live together out of anything, it should be Viagra and black and white VHS tapes. These things are rampant in retirement homes, and both will impress your hipster girlfriend by making her think that you get hard on from Ingmar Bergman films. All that to say, as of June 3rd, 2020, 190,000 Canadians have had to repay their CERB checks. Now, you might think that all of these financial misdemeanours would have given the CRA or the government cause to shut down the CERB altogether. But given all of the confusion, the government isn't really calling fraud so much as it's politely asking for that money back, which is such an extremely Canadian solution to any problem. Oh, sorry to be a bother, I'm sure you meant well and just accidentally typed your name into the emergency relief fund, despite the fact that you actually got fired from your job for getting high and making a penis shape on the field that you were supposed to be mowing for your neighbour. So even if you wanted to get the CERB legitimately, it wasn't easy to get all the answers. People reported having to make dozens of phone calls to connect, and once connected, it might actually be a 3.5-hour wait to speak to a real live human, which according to Canadian employment law you can now list on your resume as phone skills. One person we interviewed even said she was asked to fax a document to the CRA to get her payments restarted. Like there was no option to send the document by email. And like most Canadians, she doesn't have a landline, let alone a fax. They may just as well have asked her to send it by carrier pigeon. Which, if it does exist in Canada, only exists in the east end of Montreal, the hipster capital of the north, with their indoor scarves and their oat milk lattes. But if you don't happen to live in Montreal and have access to your own private fleet of message-carrying fowl, you have to go with the fax option, which should mean just popping down to your local Staples to send the fax. Except all the Staples have been shut because of the pandemic that made the CERB necessary in the first place, which is why she's been asked to send a fax and off. And while CERB may only be officially coming to an end on October 3rd after 28 weeks, many Canadians found themselves at risk of losing it much earlier due to an unexpected change in their circumstances. And by that change we mean re-employment. As businesses were allowed to reopen, they tried to hire back laid-off workers to restaff. Much to their surprise, however, many employers found they were having some sort of trouble luring staff back to work. Which is an interesting choice of words used by CTV News. Luring, as in, into my trap? Employers might have preferred the headline to use words like enticing, a word, for example, you might find in a review on the Canadian ESCORT recommendation board. Now, that was supposed to be a screenshot from an ESCORT review, but to get it I had to make an account, and according to my girlfriend, that would give me access to information that I can't be trusted with. So, it turns out, however, that luring is actually a pretty apt word to use. Workers recalled to their jobs were facing a difficult choice. Continue to collect $2,000 a month to stay home, or accept the exposure risk of returning to work for what was, in some cases, actually less money. According to a survey conducted by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, roughly 1/3 of employers reported they were struggling to get workers back to their pre-pandemic jobs, with the president of the CFIB, Dan Kelly, speculating that fears about health and safety of returning to work and responsibilities at home to care for children or elders play a role. And that's why you go to the experts, folks, for worldly insights like maybe they're scared of catching the virus that's killed 850,000 people worldwide. You might just be onto something there, Dan. It's worth noting, however, that it's not all about safety. For a lot of Canadians, it's about whether or not they were actually making $2,000 a month at their job, which, if you haven't done the math already and your phone is off in another room somewhere, comes out to about $24,000 annually, or just barely over the poverty line for an adult living alone. In other words, CERB wasn't just a bailout for some Canadians, it was actually a raise that put them over the poverty line for the first time. Which raises the question, just how badly is the workforce being paid if they're earning more on an emergency relief benefit fund than they are while being gainfully employed? In 2016, Statistics Canada conducted a study comparing the median after-tax household incomes of millennials, Gen Xers and baby boomers. They compared the incomes of Canadians between the ages of 25 and 34 from the years 2016, 1999 and 1984, and then adjusted for inflation since 1984 was like almost 30 years ago. What? 1980 was 40 years ago? Fortunately, the study found that millennials are actually paid significantly better than either Gen Xers or boomers, but they also have significantly more debt, and significantly worse up-and-coming celebrities. The study also showed that after adjusting for inflation, millennials have a median after-tax household income of roughly $44,000 a year, compared to roughly $33,000 for Gen Xers and boomers. However, the median mortgage level in 1984 was only $67,000, or roughly twice the median income, while in 2016 it was $218,000, which is 5 times the median income. In other words, boomers under the age of 34 had an easier time buying a house than millennials under the age of 34, who apparently exist. This is important because home ownership plays a huge role in calculating a person's net worth, and the difficulty in buying one's first home nowadays has led to a dramatic increase in the gap between the richest and poorest millennials as compared to Gen Xers. I mean, it kind of makes sense since most millennials haven't even played Monopoly, which is the main way that boomers learned about the housing market in the first place. Instead, these youngsters are out in the park smoking legalized weed, playing something called spike ball, which is not to be confused with the lower quality Slamo, which is basically the same game but in a different colour. Neither of which teach you anything about defaulting on your mortgage, which lets the bank buy your property back in the first place. To find out how we got here, we turn to the Bank of Canada, who have been tracking something called Wage Common and its inputs over the last 10 years. I mean, take a look at this graph. No, really, take a look at it. Long and hard. And if you understand anything about it, please explain it to us in the comments, because we have no idea. How is anyone supposed to make heads nor tails of their financial situation with graphs and data like this? Buying a house might become easier though, as the pandemic has caused overall real estate prices to drop. Changes in how many people work post-pandemic may also have a more drastic and permanent impact on real estate prices, as tech giants such as Facebook, Twitter, Square and Shopify have decided to make working from home a permanent change. This means more people will move out of the cities and move to areas where homes are cheaper, and we'll all have a little bit more disposable income in general, as our entire wardrobes will consist of 3 pairs of jogging pants and 1 adult onesie. Of course, working from home assumes we're working at all. Mikael Skuterud, an economics professor at the University of Waterloo, foresees a potential situation where there are many workers without jobs and many employers with job vacancies they can't fill. How many job vacancies? We'll never know, because Statistics Canada has actually stopped tracking job vacancy data due to cutbacks caused by the pandemic. So what we do know is, at a starting point, there are at least several jobs available at Statistics Canada. So with so much uncertainty surrounding the job market and with a workforce that doesn't fully understand the complexities of the economy, it's clear that Canadians may require some kind of financial relief that's a little bit more stable and permanent than CERB. Which makes this the perfect opportunity to try something like Universal Basic Income, or UBI. What is that, you might ask? Well, the UBI is a plan where, as the title suggests, everyone gets an income supplement. Another thing you might ask is, how much does everyone get with a UBI? To which I might say, I don't know, $50 million a day. Sure, let's all just be super rich. I'm going to make it rain like a Vancouver summer's day. I'm going to be tossing out so much brown you can call me your dirty daddy. What? No, actually, not even close. Usually these plans are aimed at getting everyone's income to just above the poverty line. It's about giving people a supplement to their earnings, not a whole new source of income. Think of it like making sure there were enough lifeboats on the Titanic so everyone gets saved, and no one needs to argue if there was enough room on the damn door for Rose and Jack. So does it work? Well, I mean, if you're talking about the door, then no. Because it's not a door, it's the top of a door frame. And it was made of pine, so no, it would not have been enough to save them both. As can be seen by Canada's own Mythbusters' attempts to do the whole thing in this video from 2016.
Hey Ross, Jamie. Sorry. Let's see if we can both get on this thing.
Will Adam and Jamie's Titanic tale be consigned to Davy Jones' locker? Jack's first attempts to get aboard the board seem very similar to the movie. The board does appear to be only made for one.
As for Universal Basic Income, however, it turns out Canada already tried this years ago, specifically in 1974 in Dauphin, Manitoba. No, Dauphin. At the time they called it Mincome, and they tried it for 4 years. So did it work? Well, here's what it did do. It led to a decrease in the rates of hospitalizations, a rise in the number of children completing high school, and improvements in mental health. And it's worth noting it did not lead to an increase in people leaving their jobs. Did anyone stop working? A little bit. Mothers to spend more time with their kids, and students who decided to focus more on their studies. You know, people that even the stuffiest of conservatives would have a hard time calling lazy leeches on society. And we're not even the only country to give this a go. A recent trial of the universal basic income in Finland not that type of Finland and Europe, found that the basic income gave many of the unemployed the ability to find work, actually reducing unemployment and not encouraging it. So all that to say, it seems that if done correctly, the UBI might just work out after all. So why not do it? Well, the example of Mincome in Manitoba came with its detractors. Social work professor James Mulvale noted there's very strong feelings out there that we shouldn't give people money for nothing. And you're right, James, the only group that should give people money for nothing is Dire Straits while doing their third encore after they've played Sultans of Swing and Walk of Life. Another UBI naysayer, Evelyn Forget, a professor of health sciences at the University of Manitoba, agrees with Mulvale, saying that the universal basic income is politically difficult to implement. Since when? When did everyone gets free money become a difficult pill for voters to swallow? I guarantee you that if Don Cherry ran on a platform of giving everyone money, he would still get 5% of the ethnic vote. I mean, that's the kind of platform that even big corporations can get behind. Former Walmart CEO S. Robson Walton is a proponent of universal basic income. Yes, it turns out the Walton family aren't against people having money, they're just against people having their money, which is why Walmart famously doesn't pay its employees a living wage. Universal basic income would effectively transfer the responsibility of guaranteeing a living wage to the government. In other words, there's an argument to be made that low-paying companies like Walmart and Amazon would actually get on board. Another argument against UBI comes from Greg Mason, an economist at the University of Manitoba, who points out all the experiments so far have only considered whether basic income affects the willingness to work of those receiving extra payments. But they haven't looked at the people who are just above the threshold for receiving basic income. Those people could well become very resentful of anyone who isn't working and yet only earns slightly less than them. The fear is that people in low-paying jobs would take a marginal pay cut just to stay at home instead of having to pack your Amazon Prime overnight shipping order of your new bathing suit and pillowcases. Okay, fair point. So let's not make it a marginal pay cut. Let's put the universal basic income at just enough to get you to the poverty line. A living wage. Enough to reliably get you food and shelter. Then, let's put the minimum wage for a full-time worker at a substantially higher amount, so you can't just get by, but you can actually afford a few creature comforts like better food and nicer shelter. Okay, now who's going to pay for that? Walmart? Amazon? Yes. All the mega corporations will be forced to either pay proper wages to their employees or pay taxes to fund universal basic income. Either way, the burden of keeping Canadians financially stable falls to the companies who pay us and who we pay in turn by buying their goods and services. Would it work? I don't know. I'm at best a comedian playing devil's advocate, and at worst a comedian playing Animal Crossing because I have not been paying attention to my village and for sure my turnips are worth nothing on the stock market right now. I mean, I know I could use it. I do have a new bathing suit to buy.